So pleasant good morning. My name is Kadeen Smith and welcome to another Carib Web Dialogue, a part of the SDGs and You series, which is a webinar series aimed at highlighting the Sustainable Development Goals and their relevance and importance to the Caribbean region. Today we are speaking about sustainable maritime development, and this addresses SDGs 5, 13, and 14. These are to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Goal 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And Goal 14 is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Today with us, we have Ms. Vivian Rambarath Parasram, Mr. Colin Young, and Ms. Dwinette Eversley. You would have received their biographies, and you will also receive Ms. Eversley's biography very soon. So I'm going to just go straight into the webinar, and I just remind you to stay updated with our activities on our Facebook page, Caribbean Future Forum, our website, www.caribbeanfutureforum.com, and our Twitter, which is @forum_Caribbean. Without further ado, I'd like to give word to Mr. Colin Young.
Thank you very much, Kadeen. Good morning to you and to your viewers. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be here to share a bit about the work of the IMO as it relates to the SDGs. I'm just going to give a general overview of what IMO is about, a sense of how we came about or went about in our involvement with the SDGs, and some of the areas where we are interacting with the SDGs in the region. So that as a specialized agency of the United Nations, IMO is essentially the global standard-setting authority for safety, security, and environmental performance of international shipping. Our main role really is to create a regulatory framework for the shipping industry that is fair and effective, universally adopted, and universally implemented. If you put this another way, its role is to create a level playing field so that ship operators cannot address their financial issues by simply cutting corners that could compromise on safety, security, and environmental performance. This approach encourages innovation and efficiency in the shipping industry. Shipping is truly an international industry, and it can only operate effectively if the regulations and standards are themselves agreed, adopted, and most importantly, implemented on an international basis. And the IMO is the forum at which this process takes place. IMO measures or conventions cover all aspects of international shipping, including ship design, construction, equipment, manning, operation, and its disposal, to ensure that this vital sector remains safe, environmentally sound, energy efficient, and also secure. Shipping is an essential component of any program for future sustainable growth. And through the IMO, the organization's member states, civil society, and the shipping industry are already working together to ensure a continued and strengthened contribution towards a green economy and growth in a sustainable manner. The promotion of sustainable shipping and sustainable maritime development is one of the major priorities of IMO. To provide a bit of a background, at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio +20, held in 2012, IMO highlighted its contribution and that of the shipping industry to sustainable maritime development. After Rio +20, and in anticipation of the development of the SDGs, IMO developed a concept of sustainable maritime transportation system. And we love acronyms at IMO, so this is SMTS, and dedicated the theme for the 2013 World Maritime Day to sustainable shipping. The SMTS concept identified the various imperatives that should be met to implement an SMTS. and the activities that will need to be undertaken to achieve them. This concept was developed to draw attention to the vital importance of shipping and to highlight that cooperation is needed amongst all maritime stakeholders to realize its full potential. In December 2015, the 29th session of the IMO Assembly, which is essentially the highest decision-making body at IMO, adopted a resolution on the strategic plan for the organization for the 6-year period 2016 to 2021. The plan took into account implementation of the 2030 agenda. One of its strategic directions states that IMO will actively promote its role as the primary international forum on matters within its competence and ensure and strengthen the linkage between safe, secure, efficient, and environmentally friendly maritime transportation, the development of global trade, the world economy, and the realization of the new United Nations Development Agenda and the SDGs. But when looking at the World Maritime Day theme for 2016, shipping indispensable to the world, the theme was chosen to focus on that critical linkage between shipping and global society and to raise awareness of the relevance of the role of IMO as the global regulatory body for international shipping. International shipping is inherently indispensable for economic growth and sustainable development, and therefore indirectly plays a role in all of the sustainable development goals. IMO provides assistance to states through its Integrated Technical Cooperation Program, of course ITCP, which is designed to assist governments which lack the technical knowledge and resources that are needed to operate a shipping industry safely and efficiently. Since 2012, and within the framework of the organization's review and reform, IMO proactively introduced two major innovative policy decisions on the delivery of its technical assistance, with a view to aligning them with the post-2015 development agenda. These were the introduction of country maritime profiles, CMPs, which is essentially an online mechanism that provides a snapshot of a country's technical assistance needs, and the concept of providing technical assistance to member states in the formulation of their national maritime transport policies, NMTPs, both of which will be critical in the implementation of the SDGs. IMO, of course, recognizes that in order for member states and the United Nations system to implement the 2030 agenda, the new normative framework will have to be translated into national policies and strategies, taking into account cross-cutting issues. As the implementation of the 2030 agenda will take place principally at the country level, the organization is required to formulate innovative policies to respond to the needs of the countries at national level, regional, and also global levels. When looking specifically at the SDGs, although several of the SDGs are relevant to IMO's work, SDG 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development, is the most obvious of IMO's work. As you may be aware, the blue economy, or blue growth, is an emerging paradigm supporting of several of the SDGs in which SIDS have taken a lead. At the global level, initiatives are taking place by various entities on ocean governance, which will have a significant effect on our work. In particular, the development of an internationally legally binding instrument under UNCLOS on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Regionally, through the Regional Marine Pollution Emergency Information and Training Center, Caribbean, which we call RAPREMPETEC Caribbean, the IMO, together with the United Nations Environment Program, the United States Coast Guard, and the government of Curacao, provide technical assistance on matters related to the sustainability of the marine environment in the wider Caribbean region, by assisting countries to implement IMO instruments for the reduction of pollution from ships. Technical assistance is provided through developing and assessing national and multilateral contingency plans, the delivery of training and workshops, the provision of technical support and consultancy, and lastly, the dissemination of information and raising public awareness. Then there is SDG 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. It's also relevant to IMO's work. With regard to the Paris Agreement on climate change, IMO has worked extensively to address greenhouse gas emissions from shipping and has adopted the only legally binding energy efficiency measures for an industry sector, which will require ships built by 2025 to be 30% more energy efficient than those built in 2014. The adoption of mandatory reduction measures for all ships from 2013 and onwards will lead to significant emission reductions and also a substantial cost saving for the shipping industry. The maritime sector and IMO have a major role to play in pursuing the SDGs and undertaking action to mitigate climate change. Consequently, states in the region may designate emission control areas which, within their more stringent controls on sulfur emissions and nitrogen oxides that may be emitted from ships. For more than 2 decades, IMO has had a program supportive of SDG 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, as well as MDG 3, promote gender equality and empower women. Within the framework of the ITCP, IMO's gender program has strengthened national and regional capacities through gender-specific fellowships that facilitated access to high-level technical training for women in the maritime sector in developing countries through the identification and selection of women by their respective authorities for career development opportunities in maritime administrations, ports, and maritime training institutions. IMO supported the formation of the Women in Maritime Association Caribbean, familiarly known as WIMA, in April 2015, one of 6 such associations worldwide. I'm happy to mention that the 2 ladies next to me are very much well involved at WIMA. These 3 SDGs are examples of those that are obviously related to IMO's mandate or work, but the list is by no means exhaustive. One of the main challenges for governments in the region is the implementation of the instruments to which they are party into national legislation. For example, when taking the 9 mandatory instruments into consideration, of the 14 Caribbean states supported by the Office of the RMA, on average, 87% are party to the mandatory instruments, and 51% have implemented those instruments. As the United Nations system has been requested to promote system-wide coherence and coordination of sustainable development policies to link their specific mandate within the SDGs and assist member states to implement them. And although the SDGs go beyond the activities of the ITCP, IMO considers that it may be more appropriate to link the SDGs with the organization's strategic directions and high-level action plan before linking them to the ITCP to give effect to the SDGs. Nadine, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to now give the floor to Ms. Vivian Nambra.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kaylin. Thank you for hosting this forum. It's a wonderful initiative, and I do hope that our colleagues at the university are also taking advantage of this opportunity. I'm from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have a Maritime Studies unit. We are dedicated towards providing quality education in the maritime sector, and in this regard, we have programs that cater to maritime development. We have seafarer programs currently delivered at the operational level. Those of us in the maritime sector would know what that really means. And we have degree programs that cater towards building and sustaining the development of the shore-based sector. So how does this relate to sustainable development goals? Essentially, all our programs underscore the importance of the environment. Managing the oceans and managing environmental impacts to the ocean requires holistic environmental management. We recognize that you cannot manage the oceans in isolation. We recognize the importance of land-based monitoring and interventions in order to manage our marine environment as well. Colin has given us a wonderful overview of the initiatives of the IMO and its partner institutions in the UN. The challenges to implementation, we cannot emphasize that enough. A statistic that he just shared, 51% of the countries having implemented the mandatory conventions. These are challenges that we need to understand the impact. This morning I heard through the Trying to be able Chamber of Commerce, they were having a discussion. Economists ranked our institutional performance at 21%. This impacts every aspect of governance. This impacts every aspect of effectiveness. So one of the things I've also been saying to my colleagues and our students is that we are not to just identify the problems. We are also to discuss the solutions. So this morning, my contribution will focus on 3 areas: institutional effectiveness, and individual and community effectiveness. So in terms of institutional effectiveness, it's common throughout the Caribbean to lament the state of our legal and institutional requirements. What is required to give effect to these international standards? Sometimes the legislation is effective, and what happens? The institutions and the resources required to effect the implementation of these standards are left in abeyance. This affects us profoundly. It affects the implementation of the standards, and it affects our performance as a region. So oftentimes we would find technocrats, and we would find even students and advocates of the environment and society throwing up their arms and saying, you know, we're awaiting institutional reform. But what can we do while we await institutional reform? Institutional reform, and oftentimes we forget that the legislation is just one aspect of environmental governance. There's a lot that we can do collectively as communities, as NGOs, as civil society, that can be done outside the legislative framework and promote a better environment for us all. So again, focusing on the solution. As a university, we've also embraced the concept of service learning. Traditionally, our universities in the Caribbean have focused on churning out professionals that focus on bottom line, on dollars and cents. We need to redefine the bottom line in terms of dollars and cents. We need to recognize that the environment, if it's undermined, that profit that we're seeing is perhaps not truly profit. So we have to embrace what is environmental economics and embrace that in our decision making as to what constitutes a true profit. In terms of the individual, we need to understand and stand up and request accountability. We don't do that enough. Transparency has long been recognized as one of the requirements for institutional effectiveness. The effectiveness of transparency is very much dependent on what we do as individuals and how much we stand up and hold our decision makers in terms of accountability. In terms of the community is as effective as it makes itself. Very much like international law, it is as effective as states make them. If states do not implement these conventions, the international initiatives stand to fail. What makes a state implement these conventions? It's the political will. The political will is supposed to be a reflection of society. Society has to mobilize, has to underscore the environmental principles. We have to recognize that effective ocean governance, effective land governance is predicated on all our actions. It is us that will make a collective and profound impact in terms of environmental governance. So in terms of the SDGs, it is enforced, it is underscored across our curricula as a university. But how do we monitor our graduates? How do we see that they're making an impact? Again, it is when we make that individual change, when we are successful in transforming the paradigm of what constitutes a profit, what constitutes progress, what constitutes development, that we would have been successful as a country, as a community, as the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. And just before we move on to our third speaker, I'm just going to remind the audience that you can continue to submit your questions. And just after Jeanette presents, we'll begin answering the questions live. So I hand over to you.
Thanks, Kadeen. Hi, everyone. My name is Dwinette Eversley, and I used to be involved in the maritime sector in a very constructive and passionate way as a public sector representative from Trinidad and Tobago. And over the years, I've come to be equally passionate about people development and social development. And so I especially want to welcome persons who are tuning in from other parts of the Caribbean, as well as from our home base here in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome all. You've heard Colin speak about the IMO and the work of that organization as the UN specialized agency in respect of pollution prevention, safety of life at sea. You heard Vivian tie in the issue of accountability and holding ourselves and institutions accountable for making real change so that we can monitor what progress and development takes place. And in respect of the sustainable development issues and the maritime sector, I want to focus in particular on the women in the sector, as I represent the Women in Maritime Association of the Caribbean as the Vice President of Capacity Building and Development, Women and Development. And that organization came into being last year in Kingston, Jamaica, arising out of a real interest in promoting the genuine engagement and empowerment of women in the sector. We have always recognized that even at the international level, certainly the International Maritime Organization and the International Labour Organization have recognized, and the International Transport Federation, which is the union for all transport issues globally, there has been a recognition, a conscientious recognition that the participation of women in this sector is grossly underrepresented. And you have to see how this is an immediate and urgent nexus to SDG 5, which speaks about achieving gender equality and empowering all women. Now, as you know, the majority of the world's trade is generated through shipping. If you consider your lives for 1 second, what do you not get through shipping? All your consumer items, movement of oil, energy, everything is generated or is done through international shipping. And it is predicted that there is going to be a shortfall of officers or crew officers to man ships, which are becoming more and more technologically complex. There's going to be a shortfall of employment opportunities in the sector in the next decades of about 40,000 officers. Now again, when as conscious students, if you're talking about the SDGs at all, bear always in mind the intersectionality of all, because there's an SDG that deals with employment generation. So we are seeing that there is going to be a shortfall and we have an issue of generating employment. and we are talking about the underrepresentation of women in the sector. So there are about 1.25 million seafarers in the world, and only 2% of that is women. So if we are talking about employment generation, if we are talking about equality of women, we understand immediately that there's a problem. And for us in the Caribbean, the number of women who are actually on board ships is the lowest globally. Between the Caribbean and Africa, we have only about 5% of seafarers out of that 1%, 1 to 2% global total. Granted, there are more women involved in the maritime sector at the shore-based level. But when we analyze and consider where they are involved, they may not necessarily be involved in technical disciplines in the sector. So in focusing on SDG 5, I wanted to talk about some inequities that we have that are clear in terms of employment and genuine participation and the percentages of women involved. And we want to talk about this, what can be termed discriminatory practices or cultural and social concepts that perpetuate discrimination and hinder access of women in the sector. That I want to conceptualize within the framework of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Because CEDAW says that discrimination is any act that violates any woman's human rights in all spheres. Talking to women seafarers, especially younger women who have trained as seafarers and who need to find opportunities to go on board ships to sail, to advance in the career and have upward mobility. In the Caribbean and generally globally, there are barriers to that. There are companies that present barriers. They don't have the facilities on board to take women, so that there is never any access. And it is a human rights violation. And if it's a human rights violation, it's a violation that for which a state can be held responsible. There are other issues of discrimination, and while we are speaking of the maritime sector, it is important for us to remember when you're doing your research, if you can't find information about the maritime sector, all non-traditional sectors in which women are involved, there are natural determinants, from the issue of curriculum, what you can choose in schools, what kind of subjects you can access, issues of going to college, hiring, retaining. Those are all issues where there are natural and societal barriers. The important issue about societal barriers in the maritime sector, we always say it is documented everywhere, it's a male-dominated sector. Women don't do certain things. And perhaps those considerations have been protectionist, but they are wrong. So that is why we have the IMO, and they have already a very advanced program to integrate women in the sector. They deconstruct some of these barriers, offering more training, opportunities for professional upgrade. We have the ILO looking at consolidating all their maritime conventions into one convention that improves the condition of all persons who go to sea, and which I imagine will pay particular attention to the gendered issues of seafaring. And you have in particular the ITF representing its members and calling for specific recommendations on board ships which relate to some of the SDG goals. For example, one of the biggest barriers that women on board ships face is the lack of access to technology, a way of keeping in touch with their families, a way of creating, of maintaining a community of practice and a community of comfort, which is there for emotional strength and well-being. And so the ITF has said that technology, access to technology should be improved. And that is one of the SDG goals in respect of women enhance the use of enabling technology to promote the empowerment of women. The SDG speaks about adopting and strengthening policies and legislation for the promotion of gender equity. In respect of the maritime sector, we want to see issues about legislation that promotes bodily integrity and speaks against infringements of bodily integrity, which again, the research tells us is a particular issue for women in the maritime sector. Sexual harassment, both overt and covert. When the SGD tells us about eliminating all forms of violence against girls and women, again, the issue of bodily integrity, the issue of coercion in terms of what jobs you can do and what jobs you can't do, those are some of the things that come to mind. Because we want to have a playing field where the power dynamics don't prevent any girl or woman from pursuing a career, getting the opportunity to advance to the highest level of that career. And finally, especially in respect of women who are on board ship, the SDG talks about sexual and reproductive health and rights. One of the research tells us that a commonly cited problem for women who go to sea is the issue of the provision of something as simple as sanitary items on board ships and infant access to morning after pill, just maternity care, being afraid to access maternity care or grow a family because you lose your job or you lose an opportunity for upward mobility. And these are not the issues that men face. And of course, when we talk again and when we ground ourselves in the human rights framework and the CEDAW framework, we realize these things are infringements of basic human rights, and those things are being addressed or should be addressed within the development model of institutions like the IMO. And it is certainly something that our organization, WIMAC, wants to promote through a code of conduct for women in the maritime sector. So I'll stop there for now. It's a lot to digest. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you very much. And I see we already have quite a number of questions, so I'll go right into the Q&As. And the first is directed to Mr. Colin Young. So it's, what is the IMO doing about the passage of nuclear waste in the region?
Interesting. That's an interesting one. IMO is the place where countries meet to decide what standards in terms of safe shipping should take place. What are the standards that should be developed? So I believe there is a convention, the nuclear convention, that is in fact in force, which means that the parties that should sign up to say that they support that instrument, that has been done, it has met its criteria. However, in the Caribbean, I think there's only one country that has signed up to that convention. The instrument provides protection, or no, let me not say protection, but provides a mechanism whereby should there be an incident at sea by ship that is transporting nuclear material, there's a mechanism by which the states that may have been affected would get assistance with regard to cleanup or prevention of any damage to the environment or to that state. So that instrument is available should states wish to protect themselves from that type of incident.
Thank you very much. Another question we have, what are the career options within the maritime industry and what qualifications should an individual pursue to ensure that they are well trained and equipped for upward mobility in the industry? So I'm not sure.
Sure, I can take that. So it depends on what area of the industry you're interested in. If you're interested in seafaring, At the support level, you're just required to undergo basic safety training and some additional training as there are new standards in force that came into force in 2013 for seafarers. If you are interested to going to sea as an officer of the watch, in particular, at least for our university, in addition to your standard 5 CXCs or ordinary level, we require physics and mathematics, and of course English, as requirements to access the training to become an officer of the watch. And once you access that training, of course, and you continue your professional development, you can access further training that will take you through to the management level. Degree programs that are offered throughout the region as well, the standard requirements are 2 A levels plus your communication studies. And you know, at the degree level, it depends on the area that you choose to specialize in. You can access specialization on coastal zone management, on surveying. You can get into more of the technical side of things in terms of engineering. So it really depends on where your interest lies. But the standard requirements for accessing the seafaring career options at the officer level will require maths and physics as a minimum in addition to your standard 5 CXCs.
Thank you very much. Another question we have is that the idea of a paradigm shift to get adequate environmental management seems quite long-term and even utopian. Could we hear what can be done now in the short and medium term to alleviate the problem? Which one would like to take this question?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what problem, but in terms of more effective governance over the oceans, getting involved, speaking out, playing a part in a community group. There are constant beach cleanups that are coordinated by different agencies and NGOs. To be a part of the environmental movement isn't very hard. To be a part of ocean governance isn't hard. You can volunteer. Volunteerism is key. In terms of the legislative reform, you can do your part in lobbying for the environmental lobby because that is what gives a priority to the legislation that governments choose to bring, the draft legislation that governments choose to bring to their parliament is very much dependent on the political will of the people as well. So you can do your part as lobbying your MP, being a part of environmental movements. And if you're interested in actively making a difference as well, you know, wanting to see a tangible difference, participate in the beach cleanup, be a part of the advocates of the environment, you know, reduce your carbon footprint, recycle, be a part of recycling initiatives. So volunteerism is key. So yes, we understand that, you know, it's a long-term paradigm shift, but as an individual and as part of a community, you can do your part as well.
I wanted to add to what Vivian said. It's a paradigm shift, but it's also a very fundamental internal paradigm shift. If you are in North America or Canada, you understand immediately the implications of what your waste does to the environment. And in the Caribbean, the majority of our waste ends up in the sea. That is a fact. Issues of recycling, being a conscientious manager of your own waste, those are fundamental issues that have to take interest and commitment. Yesterday on Facebook, I was very much assaulted by a post about a woman who car number pasted on Facebook also, who threw a bottle in the road in front of other cars that were going to be following her. And I see it all through the Caribbean. People don't care about themselves. It's not only about your country and your environment. Because how can you care about yourself and what is the legacy for others when you indiscriminately throw out waste? So the paradigm shift is internal. I agree it is there. And perhaps the internal ones are the most difficult ones to master. But certainly it can be done over a generation.
Thank you. I'm going to share two questions. One would be for Dwinette and one would be for Collins. So let me just share for Dwinette. It would be, what suggestions would you make based on your experiences to increase the priority for these gender-based issues in the sector by the government and by like national leaders? So what suggestions you would have? And then for Colin, you spoke about IMO's policy development work, their training and capacity development, but did not reflect on how the IMO works with people to engage communities around protection of the ocean. I'm aware that there is a human element component of the IMO's work, which does involve ensuring environmental protection and involving the entire spectrum of human activities, including shore-based management. And so our participant asked, what does the IMO do to reach communities? So we can hand over to Dwinette.
Thank you. Increasing priority for gender-based issues. It's a very good question. And all of us in the Caribbean need to be aware of where we are with our national gender policies. Each country of the Caribbean has acceded or ratified the CEDAW Convention. And having done so, there is a requirement to translate the provisions of that convention into national law. Where are we with national gender policies? One, are you aware? Do you take part in the national opportunities to debate what goes into a gender policy, and to influence in any way which sectors or which issues in a policy may be underrepresented? And that is a fundamental right which we fail to exercise as citizens of the Caribbean. With respect to the issues, particularly of women in the sector, I think women in the sector have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, when we talk about sectoral development in the Caribbean, we are so silo focused. Our issues are priority, our issues are cogent, and they're the most important issues in the world. But they are not the only important issues in the world, because all issues are intersectional and are important. And there is a very clear impetus for us to develop partnerships to move the gender agenda, or want of a better word. I didn't want to sound like a rhyme today, but to move the gender agenda forward. Partnerships, focus, exercising your right to participate and to have your say in development. I think those are some of the things that we must do.
And Colin, to share a bit about what the IMO does with communities.
So the question takes me in an area that we are not very familiar with or interact with as much. And to explain that, the assistance provided by IMO relates to technical assistance. That is, our focus is on safe, secure, and efficient shipping on clean oceans. Whenever there's an amendment to the safety standards, which are the conventions to which the states are party, then IMO would advise the states what those changes are and give them an awareness or raise that awareness of how it would impact upon them in terms of their implementing those instruments in their national legislation. The goal is always, once you have signed up to a convention and you are mandated to make that convention or bring that convention into your national legislation. So communities or interaction normally are with the the administrations in each country. That is the level or the interface with IMO and each country. So the human element aspect of this relates to ensuring that the seafarer is following the standards that are put for safety. Most times when one looks at incidents that occur at sea, generally speaking, it is because of human error. And this is where that human element takes place as part of the safety of training, certification, watchkeeping standards in the STCW convention. So the interface with the community lies with the country. So once there is an interaction with IMO, providing the technical assistance to the country to ensure it can meet its mandate under whatever convention or instrument it is party to, it is then left up to the state to implement those instruments at that community level. So I'm hoping that that kind of does answer the question. Yes.
Thank you very much. I just want to give our speakers an opportunity to have a sip of water if you need, before we move into the other questions. We have quite a few. Anybody want anything?
Yeah,
I'm just going to read the next question by the time. So firstly, the participant says, thank you for hosting this forum. You're welcome. And to any of the speakers, can you address what is being done in terms of risk assessment in maritime navigation in the region, particularly with the expansion of the Panama Canal and the ongoing construction of the Nicaragua Canal? Also, just off of that, are there any plans to develop marine corridors across the region?
If I may just, let me see if I can tackle that one a bit. Again, the safety standards prescribe the mannerisms that ships should operate in terms of the interaction with each other. In the Caribbean, once you are party to the convention, once you are a flag state, which is where a ship is registered with a particular state, so therefore it follows the laws of that state. It is necessary that that ship operates to a particular standard. And once it is doing that, then it should be able to do so efficiently. With regard to risk assessment, there is what is called, whenever there's an incident, for instance, let's take an external example that is more or less popular, the Costa Concordia. The reports out of those incidents and investigations that take place, and the reports out of those incidents are looked at in detail at IMO, and any things that can be learned, what we call lessons learned coming out of that incident, are then generally included in updating the standards of safety. So that is the method by which essentially an assessment takes place to ensure if there's an incident, what caused it, and therefore is there something we are missing that needs to be improved. In the region, apart from the conventions that relate to what we generally term ships that are 500 gross tons and above, there are also two instruments specific to vessels that operate within the region. These are the SCV code and the Caribbean Cargo Ship Safety Code. The SCV relates to small commercial vessels. Both of those also provide standards for ensuring that there are safe transportation of cargo and passengers for vessels that fall outside of the conventions. And again, they're also the small commercial vessels, where both of the codes were reviewed recently. One of the things that the countries in the region are looking at are also to set up a mechanism whereby when there are incidents related to those vessels, there's a mechanism whereby it would feed back to the party, or the entity responsible for that review, and improve the status of safety in the region. Where vessels travel, I think that was the last part, where they go, marine corridors. I'm unable to speak to that, but I think generally it's driven by commercial considerations, really, in terms of the most efficient way, in terms of fuel, ports, depending on which ports you have cargo. There are a number of commercial considerations where the ships would then determine where best to traverse. Thank you.
I wanted to add something in addition to what Colin has clearly stated about the safety and other implications for risk assessment. Um, Risk assessment is an ongoing and very important part of any strategic management of any agency. So risk management in the maritime sector, in addition to what will be the global standards and so on that are laid down for navigation, to prevent collisions and so on, all agencies in the maritime sector must do their own risk assessment and risk management. Maritime administrations who are managing both flag state and port state control requirements, they have ships, they have to have their risk management plan. What happened, all the things that could happen, and how they mitigate, who is responsible. In terms of a port state, countries that do not have huge registries, but whose ports are visited by different ships. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a lot of container ships, but we also have what you call those things? Tankers, yeah. Oil tankers and other types. Tankers carrying noxious liquid substances. So a responsible port should have a risk assessment and risk management plan. So it's just to say that risk management, risk assessment starts somewhere with the global standards, but must be trickled down to all components of the sector.
Thank you. Given Guyana's newfound offshore petroleum wealth, to what extent can the Caribbean arm of the women's maritime sector benefit from the plethora of opportunities which no doubt will exist?
Guyana, I know, has a very vibrant maritime administration, and they also have a capable maritime training institute. We talked a lot about seafarers and the opportunities available for training, seagoing sector. But the maritime, the shore-based sector, has also a plethora of opportunities for port management, for ship handling and ship husbandry, for administering maritime obligations of a state, flag state, and as a port state. So there are training or there are career opportunities across the board in the sector, and of course also, which will become more and more important to Guyana, in maritime law and oceans law policy. So anybody who is interested, I think those are areas in which you can do. Those are the pure maritime issues and training career options, and of course there will be options peculiar to the energy sector and environmental sector, oil management, offshore production, and so on. In offshore installations, marine terminal operations. And again, those are programs that you assess through tertiary level training, where you would require the standard matriculation requirements. You have 2 A-levels and...
Thank you. And to any of the speakers, we know that one of the key elements of the SDGs is the issue of implementation. So going beyond the conventions and discussions, how do NGOs access funding from the maritime sector to take forward action?
Well, that's an interesting question, and the pool has, I will answer that question because I work with groups that have to access funding all the time, and I have already hit at the issue, find strategic partnerships. I'm trying to figure out what area would an NGO want to access funding for in the maritime sector, but it doesn't matter. Strategic partnerships. Know who are the persons in the community with competitive community, I mean the national community and the regional community with competitive advantage, and with them. I'm saying this because I work significantly with youth groups and youth networks in the Caribbean. And this is the advice I always give when they come to the question of finding funding for work that they wish to undertake. Strategic partnerships, looking at the global landscape, because an institution such as the ILO and the IMO, which are member state institutions are not likely to give money, sorry, specifically to NGOs, but there are other entities and there are other international NGOs also which offer that. So do your homework, look for who is in the environment locally and regionally. I think that's the best way to go.
Perhaps if I can add too, if the aspect of the maritime sector you're interested in is with respect to or impacts on environmental governance, at least if you're in Trinidad and Tobago, you can access the Green Fund because that is open to NGOs for applications that deal with any aspect of better innovations in environmental management.
Thank you. So next question. There have been attempts by several countries to have cruise tourism classified as tourism services as opposed to maritime services. Unfortunately, not much has happened in this regard. Where does the IMO stand on the classification of services and specifically cruise tourism?
IMO's role again comes back to safety standards for cruise shipping. So let's say, for instance, how you navigate the vessel. The persons who are working aboard the vessel should be trained in a particular manner. Waste from the ship should be treated in a particular way, disposed of in a particular way. And that ship currently should be doing what is necessary to ensure that its emissions are reduced significantly or in line with the requirements of MARPOL Annex 6. To specifically go to the classification of that industry, it lies with the member state, the IMO member state, and it would make a decision as to how it would wish best to classify the tourism industry. IMO's perspective is generally international, so that where the standards can be met by all, it is up to the member states, the individual member states, to now implement as it sees best. But there's no direct correlation between IMO standards and classification of any type of shipping.
Okay, thank you. So unfortunately, our time is running out, so I think we may have time for just two more of the questions that we have here currently. And one of them, I would like to hear more about ports in the Caribbean that are seeking to become more integrated in the communities in which they are situated. The Port of Spain port, for instance. In addition, what strategies are being developed in a participatory manner, for maritime industries to become more central to national and regional economic growth towards Agenda 2030? Is it satisfactory to leave the responsibility for ensuring participatory planning up to the state? And if you all would like me to repeat the question, it's part of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've been, and even members of the maritime sector have been advocating public-private partnerships. So in terms of leaving it up to the state, given the nature and the structure of our ports in the Caribbean region and Trinidad and Tobago, I think the government has been open and has been inviting private sector involvement and open to the concept of privatized ports. But that's really up to the commercial sector to step up and accept the challenge or embrace the opportunity there.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the last question would be, given the emphasis or focus on the Caribbean vocational qualification as a measure of competence, to what extent would professional credentials such as
engineering tech, certificate of engineering from the engineering,
right? So to what extent would those be encouraged so that our local or regional women and girls in the maritime sector can match up, in inverted commas, to their international counterparts?
CVQs are accepted. So universities accept CVQs. Those are accepted across all the Caribbean. So there should be no problem if they have this, if any young girl, woman has the CBQs and which wishes to use the CBQs as an entry to gain entry into higher level training. So I think that's great. The CBQs are there for that purpose exactly.
Thank you very much. So I would like to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. What I would ask, there are a couple of questions that we weren't able to address because of time constraints, and some of them were directed to specific speakers. So maybe we can respond via email. We have the contact information for our participants. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out, for sharing this valuable information, and of course to our viewers for tuning in. Do continue to keep updated with what we have to offer on our social media sites as well as the website. We will have a recording of this webinar available by tomorrow on our Facebook page and on our website. So thank you again and do have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kadi.
you.